Good afternoon. It's Thursday, February 4th. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. 19-year-old border police officer Hadar Cohen, who was murdered yesterday in a combined stabbing and shooting attack outside the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, was laid to rest a short time ago at the military cemetery in Yehud. Cohen succumbed to her wounds hours after being shot in the head by one of the three terrorists. A fresh recruit, Cohen was drafted into the border police only 2 months ago and was deployed on patrol 2 weeks ago. She is survived by her parents and 2 siblings. The border police officer was shot after opening fire at another terrorist who stabbed her fellow policewoman. The condition of the second border policewoman who was moderately wounded in the attack is improving, and she is said to be in stable condition. The officer suffered multiple stab wounds to her neck and chest. Earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited her at the Hadassah Mount Scopus Hospital, as well as the male soldier who was moderately injured in an attack last week outside of Bethel. Netanyahu praised the courage of the security forces, highlighting the strength of the border policewomen who prevented what he called a big disaster. The Prime Minister stressed that Israel is making immense efforts to combat terror and expressed confidence that violence will be contained, even though it will be a long struggle. The security establishment is investigating how the 3 terrorists armed with knives, explosive devices, and automatic rifles traveled from their hometown of Kabatia in the West Bank and entered Jerusalem undetected. The coordinator of government activities in the territories, Major General Yoav Mordechai, today announced he is freezing the work permits of the terrorists' extended families, preventing them from working in Israel. IBA's Margaret Duchkevich reports.
The army sealed off the West Bank town of Kabatia and arrested 5 Palestinians, relatives and friends of the 3 terrorists who carried out yesterday's deadly attack at Damascus Gate. They will be questioned to determine whether they assisted the terrorists. Their arrest sparked clashes at several sites in the town. Before dawn this morning, army engineering units completed mapping out the homes of the 3 terrorists, which are slated to be demolished in the coming days. Yesterday's fatal shooting of border policewoman, 19-year-old Hadar Cohen, was one of the first attempts by terrorists to carry out a more complex, sophisticated attack since the start of the current wave of violence 4 months ago. The Shin Bet security agency believes the 3 terrorists, Ahmad Zakarne, Mohammed Kamil and Najeh Al-Wub, belonged to a local infrastructure and were not affiliated with any specific terrorist organization. Their families are all known to be affiliated with Fatah. In December, Zakarne posted on his Facebook page his plans to become a martyr after his friend attacked soldiers and was shot dead. Last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened the Security Cabinet to discuss Israel's response and measures to be taken. The terrorists reached the old city's Damascus Gate. 2 sat on a bench and the 3rd stood nearby when a border police patrol approached them and asked them for identity papers. One handed them an ID card and another drew out an automatic rifle and opened fire at the patrol. Corporal Hadar Cohen managed to shoot back at the terrorists before she was shot by one of them in the back. One of the terrorists stabbed a second border police woman before he was shot, and the 3rd terrorist was shot by a passing policeman. Cohen, who suffered fatal gunshot wounds, died shortly after at Hadassah Hospital, Mount Scopus. Doctors this morning said her friend, who suffered serious injuries, was in a stable condition. Security officials praised the Border Police Patrol for their courageous rapid response, saying their actions prevented a much larger terror attack. Margaret Duchkevich, IBA News.
The Jerusalem District Court today sentenced a 17-year-old Jewish minor to life behind bars and a 16-year-old Jewish minor to 21 years in prison for their roles in the 2014 kidnapping and murder of Palestinian youth Mohammed Abu Khader in what was described as a revenge attack for the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teens several weeks earlier. The state asked that both accomplices, whose names are barred from publication, be sentenced to life in prison. The 3rd suspect, 31-year-old Yosef Chaim Ben David, who allegedly led the attack and since entered an insanity plea, will be sentenced at a later date. The court is awaiting results of his psychiatric evaluation. Abu Khader's family reacted with dismay, saying both minors should have been slapped with life sentences. They also called on the government to demolish the homes of the 3 Israelis who abducted and murdered their son. There was another terror attack this morning, this time in Ramleh. Two 13-year-old Israeli Arab girls stabbed a 27-year-old security guard at the entrance to the mall in the center of the town. The guard was taken to a Safar Wafeh hospital suffering light injuries. The two girls, cousins from the city's Arab neighborhood of Jarwish, were subdued by a soldier and an armed civilian and handed over to police. An initial police investigation said the girls pulled out kitchen knives and began stabbing the guard after he asked them for identification papers. The American news outlet CBS came under fire for a headline it published right after yesterday's deadly terror attack. The headline read, "3 Palestinians killed as daily violence grinds on." The caption triggered immediate outrage by the Foreign Ministry and the government press office. Foreign Ministry spokesman Emmanuel Nachshon called the headline biased and false. Head of the government press office, Nitzan Chen, said the organization would consider rescinding the press passes from foreign journalists and editors who are negligent in their work. Zionist Union Party MK Tzipi Livni wrote on her Twitter account, "If you have to choose a side of facts." The harsh criticism later led the American network to change the headline to "Palestinians kill Israeli officers, wound another before being killed." Nachshon said the new phrasing was far from ideal, but better. Hours after yesterday's deadly terror attack in East Jerusalem, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas hosted 11 families of terrorists who perpetrated attacks against Israel in recent months at his Ramallah headquarters. Abbas promised the families to act to ensure the terrorist bodies are returned to them for burial, telling them it is your right to bury your martyrs. Abbas also told the families he would organize financial assistance to those whose houses were demolished by Israel in response to the attacks so that they would be able to rebuild them. In Gaza, another Hamas tunnel reportedly collapsed, the third in the past week. There was no word on any casualties in this cave-in, but Hamas blocked off the area and imposed a media blackout on it, contrary to yesterday when it announced that 2 Hamas diggers were killed in a tunnel collapse. IDF Major General Yoav Mordechai, who coordinates activities in the territories, told Palestinian media in a rare interview that the tunnels will bring nothing but death and destruction to the Palestinians. When asked if Israel had a hand in the collapse of the tunnels recently, he replied, "God only knows." Meanwhile, IDF engineers are continuing to drill piers along the Gaza frontier to detect Hamas tunnels. The project being developed is called Zohar Dromi and involves deep trenches and special sensors to detect tunnels. The estimated cost of the barrier is about 2.4 billion shekels for the entire border. In an attempt to ease the fears of the residents in the communities surrounding Gaza, Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon toured the area yesterday. He promised the residents that the Treasury would cover all expenses that the defense establishment requested to deal with the tunnel threat. Well, joining me now in the studio to shed some light on the top stories this week is Amotz Asael, a senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post and the Dow Jones Market Watch. Amotz?
How are you?
Amotz, as we see now in this story from the Gaza Strip, the tunnel activity is frenzied. Yet the Hamas leaders are saying that they are not interested in escalating any war with Israel. What do you think?
Well, in our region, obviously, if you want peace, you have to brace for war, as the Romans said, and that is definitely true for what transpires between us and Gaza. And so, while their pronouncements, as you quote them, are nicer than belligerent pronouncements, obviously Israel cannot work based on an assumption that such pronouncements are sincere or can be taken at face value. Mm-hmm. And so we see that Israel is investing very seriously in trying to preempt a repetition of what the Gazans have done in the past through the tunnels.
Let's move on to the gas deal. The Supreme Court this week sat on the gas deal, and the Prime Minister made a highly unusual request to testify before the Supreme Court. And other people are accusing him of intimidation, they're accusing him of being transparent, and he represents big money. What's the deal here?
I think Netanyahu is looking forward to an appearance in the High Court of Justice in the context of the gas deal. The reason he's looking forward to it is that he has good reason to feel that his case is solid now in the context of such a framework. The legislative process has been completed, and so has been the executive process with Aryeh Deri's removal or self-removal from it, and Netanyahu's succession of Deri in this regard, and so formally sealing the deal. And in the meantime, he received this backwind from the OECD that backed the deal and said that it's perfectly plausible in terms of international standards of tendering such projects out. And I think Netanyahu's case in court will therefore be such that the court will in no way undo what has been done in the proper legal ways in Israel and has received such international backing.
Let's wait and see. Let's ask you about Avichai Mendelblit, who was appointed as the Attorney General this week, and he's replacing Weinstein. How is he going to compare and differ from the previous Attorney General?
Well, I think the most unique appointment was his predecessors, because Weinstein came from the private sector. That was very rare and, in fact, unprecedented in that very powerful position, which effectively heads the prosecution in Israel. And Mandelblit is only different in the sense that he comes from the military legal system, but that is not unprecedented. It was Meir Shamgar, who later was Supreme Court President, who had been in the same position that Mandelblit came from, namely the military attorney general. Having said this, what is unique about Mandelblit's appointment is not his legal background, but his previous position as cabinet secretary. While that too is not unique, because Eliakim Rubinstein also was once cabinet secretary and later attorney general and eventually also Supreme Court justice. Rubinstein did not make the leap from that position in which you're a confidant of the prime minister into the position of attorney general, where you have to face up to the prime minister. He, in the interim, was a district judge. Mandelblit comes directly from the position of cabinet secretary to the position of attorney general, and that is why he will be tested on a daily basis.
The Labour Party, the Zionist Union. This week, Avi Nissenkorn, the head of the Histadrut, joined the Labour Party. It used to be that the Histadrut leader was always a member of the Labour Party. Why is this so unusual, exceptional this time?
Well, it's mainly unique, first of all, as you say, in the fact that we only now learned that he hasn't previously been a member of Labour, but the fact that nobody cared also shows that the Histadrut really has been marginalized politically in Israel, and instead, as should be the case, it is mainly relevant in terms of its function as an arbiter in the labor markets. Having said this, this is interesting in terms of what is happening internally in labor. Nissenkorn made his move because he's afraid of Sheli Yachimovich's potential candidacy for Histadrut Secretary General, his own job, when the election comes up. And she now is in a rivalry with Herzog, and he simply calculated that in order to secure his election and his potential facing in this election of Sheli Yachimovich, he had better team up with Herzog.
So we're seeing a lot of sort of unrest in the Labour Party right now.
As always, yes.
Well, Motz Hassel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Arya.
In other news, the state is planning to build thousands of apartments in the Haifa Bay area. But to do so, it intends to confiscate agricultural land from the Moshav and the kibbutzim in the area, driving many farmers from their livelihood. We get more on this report from IBA's Efrat Batat.
Shlomit and Ilan Bar-Am are among the few pioneer farmers who live in Kfar Bialik. The farming village lies just beyond the Akko-Haifa highway, and its founders helped establish the state. Now, Kfar Bialik is in danger of losing its livelihood. The state has decided to confiscate nearly 1,000 dunams of its agricultural land in order to build hundreds, maybe thousands, of apartments. The veteran farmers are decrying the real estate tycoons' desire to turn the farmland into what they're calling concrete jungles. They say contractors aren't interested in Zionism and that they just want to destroy their farms for the sake of financial gain. These are energetic farmers who are committed to producing food for the country and are highly critical of the way the state is taking a bite out of their lands. They claim there are alternative lands, but those, they say, are in the hands of private owners and much more expensive. This is our home, says Gali Michal Shefer, a fourth-generation farmer in Kfar Bialik. We'll defend this land with our bodies. This is our livelihood. We aren't interested in compensation. It's not about money. The farmers here and at neighboring kibbutzim are gearing up to fight for their land and petition the High Court of Justice with the hope that the judges will see what the state is blind to see.
The Finance Ministry says that officials from the Regional Council of Zebulon were given a voice in the planning stages and that the balance will be reached between the farming value of the lands versus the dire need to provide new housing. Several years ago, gluten-free products were hard to find. Today, it's not more difficult to spot them in the local supermarkets, and there's even one-of-its-kind brewery in Israel, here in Israel, which specializes in creating a unique blend of beer. Earlier, I spoke with the proprietor of that brewery, Brian Medan, and asked him why there was a need for gluten-free beer.
Well, I actually started brewing gluten-free beer at home 9 years ago, a little after 9 years ago when I was diagnosed with celiac. So I started brewing at home and playing with recipes that I found. And a few years later, I started brewing it commercially in Even Yehuda. There's a place called Mifsheret Ha'am that was doing contract brewing. And that was a way for us to kind of check out the market. And we realized that there are a lot of people looking for gluten-free beer.
Well, why do celiacs have to have gluten-free beer?
Well, celiacs they can't eat anything that has gluten in it, which is barley, wheat, and some other grains. And beer is made mostly from barley, sometimes from wheat. So we had to create beer that was made out of materials that have no gluten in them. So what we chose in the beginning was buckwheat. We started brewing our beer with buckwheat as a base, instead of the barley that is usually in a beer. Mm-hmm. And then we went on to try other materials like chickpeas or hummus, which is our hummus
beer.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so we have basically one day I was eating hummus and I'm thinking this could be beer, and so I started playing with it, and it took a long time till I got a recipe that worked, that it didn't taste too sour and didn't taste too sweet, and it was perfect. And then after that we moved on to our next beer, which is a beer without any kind of malts at all. So it's a beer made out of date syrup. And our date beer is actually kosher for Passover.
Well, that's good news. I mean, beer that's kosher for Passover. Was that difficult, challenging to get a kosher license for that?
Well, not really. Since our brewery is completely gluten-free and there was nothing that was chametz in the brewery anyway, I mean, barley and hummus are both for ochlei kitniot. They're not going to have that. But it was actually pretty simple just to take the whole brewery, clean it out of all the previous grains that we had in there, or actually the kitniot that we had in there, and then we made it. Right now we're only brewing our date beer, which is kosher for Passover completely.
Well, how many celiacs are there in Israel? Is this going to catch on in the market?
Well, there's actually 3 different groups of people that would want a gluten-free beer or eating gluten-free. One are celiacs, which is approximately 1% of the population.
Really?
And then there's another percentage, which is higher than that, of people who are sensitive to gluten. They have different kinds of gluten insensitivities, and they aren't going to have gluten as well. They're going to avoid anything with gluten. And some of them, for them, it's not as critical if they have a little piece of something here and there. Celiacs, it's critical. And then there's the people going on these fad diets, and some of them are fad diets, and some of them are real diets, because people are realizing that gluten is not necessarily good for us. We've only been eating it for 10,000 years, which in the history of humanity is not that much, and it's something that we need to try to avoid. And one of the ways to do that is to find gluten-free foods, and it's an easy fix for celiacs. It's the only solution for celiacs. And these people going on diets like paleo diets and other different kinds of gluten-free diets, I have a solution for them.
You know, the boutique beer industry is growing in Israel. Where are you fitting in on this, and why hasn't anyone else done this?
Well, I think that people haven't done it because there's still a little bit of a feeling that beer has to be made by the 4 ingredients that for example, there's a law in Germany that says that beer has to be made by 4 ingredients, which is barley, hops, yeast, and water. So if you remove one of those ingredients, it's not beer. So the traditional feeling is that if you want to make beer, you have to make it that. It's something else. So there are people that don't consider this beer. I say that if it smells like beer, looks like beer, tastes like beer, it's beer.
Okay. Well, good luck, Brian Maidan at the Maidan Brewery in Carmel.
Thank you.
In financial news, the shekel today was mixed in major foreign currency trading, and share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were also mixed. Here's a look at late afternoon numbers. The IBA weather folks say tomorrow will be sunny and unseasonably warm, but tomorrow night temperatures will drop and a rainy weekend is forecasted. Here are the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That brings us to the end of this broadcast of IBA News. I'll be back on Sunday for another daily edition. Until then, have a good evening, a great weekend, and shalom from Jerusalem.